Welcome to this APC mock interview, where today we'll look at some questions on the anticipated hot topics for 2025. This will include coverage on key updates including the RICS Harris debate, focusing on the impact of artificial intelligence on the profession, the RICS 2025 business plan, the impact of UK and US election results on the industry, and much more. During the interview, we're going to look at each question in depth and explain some of the answers you can give, and I really hope this helps improve your understanding of the anticipated hot topics for 2025. The first area we'll take a look at is the impact of artificial intelligence on the industry, and a question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain your understanding of the RICS Harris debate? And to address this, candidates can advise that the Harris debate is organised annually by the RICS and provides a platform to address ethical concerns in the field of surveying and valuation. The debate honours Jonathan Harris, a former RICS president known for his contributions to professional development and education. A follow-on question we may receive is, can you explain what was discussed during the Harris debate in 2024? And to address this, candidates can advise that the debate focused on the theme of ethics in the age of artificial intelligence and its impact on valuation practices. The debate explored the ethical implications of incorporating artificial intelligence into valuation and surveying as AI becomes more integrated in these fields. Another question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain your view on the use of AI for the purposes of property valuation? And to address this will be largely dependent on the candidate's own views. However, a particular viewpoint may be that artificial intelligence does have the potential to offer greater accuracy and efficiency when carrying out a valuation. AI algorithms are able to evaluate other comparable properties and pinpoint an estimated valuation, and applications currently exist that take into account factors such as satellite imagery, crime rates, market trends, and regional economic factors. However, current drawbacks of AI are that site-specific abnormals such as property condition and special values cannot always be considered. There is also a susceptibility to a reliance on bad data, which can reduce the accuracy of the AI-generated inputs. AI can offer advantages with providing access to a wide array of data and greater efficiencies when used as a data collection and processing tool. However, in its current stage of development and into the future, it may always be critical to have significant input from a human appraiser standpoint in order to undergo rigorous checks and due diligence. A follow-on question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain the ethical concerns regarding the adoption of AI for the purposes of valuation? And to address this, candidates may advise that it's important to consider that AI algorithms do rely heavily on data, and if this data is inaccurate, incomplete, or intentionally weighted following biased data input, then this can dramatically skew results in the favour or to the detriment of the parties involved. There are also great issues around transparency of the data input and analysis, with operators of AI not always fully cognizant of how results have been generated. In order for a valuation to be compliant with RICS valuation standards, transparency of how the value has been determined is key. And there is a perception that AI models are often regarded as closed boxes, where even creators can't fully explain how decisions have been made. Therefore, to run a valuation with sole AI input is not currently compliant with current regulations and industry standards. Look, if you're finding this video useful so far and you're serious about passing your APC, we've put together a question and answers revision guidebook, and this will save countless hours compiling revision notes and contains over 1,000 questions and answers based on real-life APC interviews. It also contains example submission documents and explained step-by-step how to complete the APC. Along with the step-by-step guide, there is also a free APC diary template, along with revision mind maps on the RICS hot topics to support your revision. The study guide has helped around 90% of my colleagues pass their APC first time, and I really hope you find this a useful resource when preparing for your APC. Grab it now using the link in the description below. A follow-on question we may receive is, what impact will artificial intelligence have on the construction industry? And again, this is very dependent on the candidate's own views on the adoption of AI. However, as a starting point, candidates may suggest that a large overhead for the majority of main contractors is the estimating process, which can be very onerous and require weeks of input from skilled estimators. Artificial intelligence can assist the estimating process by supporting estimators with both data collection and processing when reviewing large tender packs made up of contract documents, drawings, specifications, and legal documentation. Site safety AI-powered cameras can also scan construction sites to detect potential safety hazards. For example, if a worker forgets to wear their helmet, an alert can be generated to advise the site management to intervene. AI-driven sensors can also be placed on site plant and machinery to predict when maintenance inspections and replacements should be undertaken. Plant and machinery downtime can cause significant costs and delays, which AI can play a significant part in reducing. AI technology can also use energy modelling software to adjust lighting, HVAC and security systems in order to reduce operating costs and improve energy efficiency. The automation of construction tasks can also be achieved for repetitive and labour-intensive tasks such as bricklaying, excavation, demolition and welding. We'll now take a look at some questions regarding the economic factors that can have an impact on the construction and property industries. The first question we'll take a look at on this area is what impact will the UK Labour government's election have on the property and construction industries? And to address this, candidates may advise regarding house building targets. The Labour government has pledged to build 1.5 million homes over the next parliamentary term, and they have reinstated mandatory housing targets and updating the National Planning Policy Framework in order to achieve this. There has also been a promise of significant investment within infrastructure projects, with significant funding planned for public infrastructure, including transportation networks, renewable energy projects and urban development. This will create opportunities for large-scale construction projects and is likely to drive economic growth and job creation. There is also a huge focus on sustainability, with the Labour government committing to embedding green practices across the industry, with policies focusing on eco-friendly materials, retrofitting of existing buildings for energy efficiency, and integrating biodiversity within urban planning. This could lead to a significant increase in demand for sustainable construction practices through regulations such as the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards. Labour also plans to address the current construction sector skills shortage through youth training initiatives and improve working conditions, such as banning 0 hours contracts, and this could in turn create a more skilled and stable workforce, but will require significant investment in order to meet labour demands. And the next question we'll take a look at is what impact will the 2024 US election results have on the property and construction industries? And to address this, candidates can advise that there is likely to be impacts regarding currency fluctuations, as the value of the US dollar often fluctuates sharply during and after an election, and these shifts directly affect the exchange rate between the dollar and pound, which in turn impacts the attractiveness of UK property to overseas investors. A weaker pound against the dollar could mean heightened interest from the US and other international buyers, particularly in prime markets like London, driving higher property prices. There is also likely to be a large impact on interest rates, as the US election influences the Federal Reserve's economic policies, which in turn affects global financial markets, and changes in US monetary policy could lead to adjustments by the Bank of England, and for UK property, interest rates are crucial, as a rise in interest rates could dampen demand, making mortgages more expensive. However, conversely, if rates stay relatively low, the market could remain buoyant, with borrowing costs staying affordable for longer. The US election is also likely to have an impact on supply chain and construction, as changes in US trade policy or tariffs could have a ripple effect through the global economy, affecting the cost of materials such as steel and timber, which could in turn result in higher costs for builders and slow down the pace of new developments or push up prices in the UK marketplace. With the US having a world-leading tech sector, the election results could also encourage further growth in the sector, which could increase the demand for technology and remote working, and this in turn could bolster demand for homes in England's regional cities, which have become increasingly popular with remote workers seeking affordability and a better work-life balance. The next question we'll take a look at is what is your economic outlook for the 2025 UK construction sector? And to address this, candidates can advise that the UK construction industry has experienced a slowdown across 2024 due to rising material and labour costs, with high inflation and interest rates keeping prices high. Due to falling inflation and small interest rate cuts towards the back end of 2024, material prices such as steel, chipboard and plastic piping are now starting to soften, and these market shifts should result in material price reductions entering into 2025 and create increased affordability for developments that may have been postponed due to them being previously unviable. A further key challenge remains in that there is a persistent skills shortage ongoing, which has been exacerbated by Brexit's impact on labour supply. This shortage is pushing up costs, making it vital for the industry to invest in apprenticeships and training programmes. Environmental sustainability also remains a key priority for the Labour government, which should support a continued shift and preference for sustainable building methods and products. These are typically more expensive, which will see a trade-off between affordability and sustainability for larger scale developers. The next question we'll take a look at is please explain your understanding of project bank accounts. And to address this, candidates can advise that a project bank account, or PBA, is a dedicated ring-fenced bank account used in construction projects to manage payments securely and transparently. They are designed to ensure that all parties involved in a project, including subcontractors, suppliers, and the main contractor, receive payments directly and promptly from the account, which minimises the risk of late or non-payment. A PBA is set up at the start of a construction project with agreements in place between the employer, main contractor, and participating subcontractors on how payments are made. The employer typically deposits funds into the PBA for work completed, with payments then made simultaneously to all parties listed within the PBA agreement. And this is based on pre-agreed terms which bypass the traditional hierarchical payment flows from client to main contractor down to supply chain level. The next question we'll take a look at is what steps would you take in the event of a main contractor insolvency? And to address this, candidates could advise first of all that they would ensure that all contractual procedures relating to insolvency are followed, especially regarding termination rights and obligations. They would then need to make record on payments made, work progress, and materials on site. If the contractor's insolvency means that they can no longer fulfil their obligations, the contract should be terminated following the specified procedures. The site should be secured to prevent any damage or unauthorised access, providing that the contract permits this, and it may also be necessary to inform subcontractors in order to remove materials or to secure their assets. A chartered surveyor should prepare a detailed valuation statement reflecting the current state of the project, and this includes assessing completed works, retention sums, and any outstanding claims such as loss and expense. Engagement of alternative contractors may be required, and if a new contractor is appointed to complete the work, a new tender process or a novation of the original contract may take place. If the contract includes provision for step-in rights through collateral warranties, a lender or developer may then take over the project. We'll now take a look at some questions regarding sustainability, which remains a key area of focus for the RICS going into 2025. And the next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of what happened at Conference of the Parties 29? And to address this, candidates can advise that COP29 was held in Baku, Azerbaijan in November 2024, and this focused on addressing the climate change finance gap through the Loss and Damage Fund designed to support vulnerable nations. Some progress was made on working towards a global carbon market, where the buying and selling of carbon emissions is facilitated to help reduce global emissions. And this market would incentivise global emissions for companies, countries, and other entities. By putting a price on carbon, it incentivises industries to innovate and invest in cleaner technologies and help to reduce the global carbon footprint. Progress was also made on the NCQG, or New Climate Financial Goal, and this was to replace the previous $100 billion goal, and this intended to ensure that sufficient financial resources are mobilised in order to support developing countries to address the impacts of loss and damage from climate-related disasters. A consensus on the amount and scope of funds required was discussed during COP29. A follow-on question we may receive on this area: can you please explain your understanding of the term global carbon market? And to address this, candidates can advise that this refers to an international system that allows for the buying and selling of carbon emissions, allowances, or credits. It is designed to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by putting a price on carbon to incentivise countries, companies, and other entities in order to innovate and invest in cleaner technologies and help to reduce the global carbon footprint. Another question we may receive is, can you please provide a high-level overview of the RICS Sustainability Report for 2024? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS Sustainability Report provided a detailed analysis of the current state of sustainability within the built environment sector. The key findings included, first of all, the identification of an increased market demand for green buildings. However, the adoption of sustainable practices remains limited. High upfront costs and insufficient government incentives form significant barriers to widespread implementation of greener building methods. The report also highlighted a need for consistent sustainability measurement across projects, and tools like the RICS Whole Life Carbon Assessment does aim to address this issue by providing a unified framework for assessing and reducing carbon emissions throughout a building's life cycle. The RICS emphasises that the level of commitment and action needs to increase substantially in order to achieve 2050 net zero targets, and the RICS continues to play a pivotal role in shaping sustainability policies and standards globally. Its involvement in initiatives like the UN's Buildings Breakthrough highlights the importance of harmonising sustainability standards worldwide. The next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of the minimum energy efficiency standards? And to address this, we can advise that the minimum energy efficiency standards are regulations in the UK that set out the minimum energy performance requirements for buildings, specifically for private rented properties. Under the regulations, properties in the private rented sector must meet at least an E rating on their energy performance certificate in order to be legally rented out. And if a building is rated lower than an E, landlords are required to improve the energy efficiency of the property unless specific exemptions apply. The regulations are part of the UK government's broader environmental and sustainability agenda, and they aim to ensure that properties are energy efficient and more environmentally friendly. The next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of the RICS policies on diversity, equity and inclusion? And to address this, candidates can advise that diversity, equity and inclusion remains a huge priority of the RICS. This is because surveying and construction are typically industries that have lagged behind others when attracting and retaining talent from different backgrounds, with the industry remaining a white male-dominated profession. Within the RICS policy document, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, the RICS sets out action plans for firms in order to support with attracting and retaining talent, regardless of their gender, socioeconomic, disability, race, age or religious backgrounds. This includes actions such as making offices accessible for all visiting personnel, ensuring speaking panels at events are diverse, consideration of where and how jobs are advertised, removing bias from the recruitment process, providing training for staff on policies and inclusive practices. The RICS rules of conduct also require RICS regulated firms and members to encourage diversity and inclusion, and there is also the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark, which is promoted by the RICS. The next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of the terms diversity, equity and inclusion, and explain why these are so important? To address this, candidates can advise that diversity refers to the makeup of who we are as humans and what makes us different. This can be in relation to our skin colour, socio-economic background, disabilities, education or religious beliefs. Organisations with a diverse workforce are proven to be more effective and are better placed to serve their communities, as they are more likely to understand the issues facing those communities. Equity is a recognition that all employees may not have been afforded the same opportunities, and looks to address any imbalances within a workforce by looking to provide equal opportunities for all. This can be done by ensuring each person has the right tools and support to fulfill their potential, regardless of their career starting point. And ensuring equity within the workforce is critical to attracting, retaining and developing talent within an organisation. And inclusion is a key part of an organisation's culture and aims to improve inclusivity of all personnel, regardless of their background. This can be crucial in allowing a workforce to feel supported, included, and comfortable in order to be their true selves and perform at their best during the workplace. Are you aware of any guidance that applies to RICS members when using social media? To address this, candidates can firstly reference their knowledge of the RICS Guidance Note, Use of Social Media Guidance for Members version 1, and this guidance note first took effect from the 30th of June 2021. With the use of social media sometimes being complex and sensitive, candidates will be expected to have a knowledge of this guidance note, as this sets out the same standards as stipulated in the RICS Rules of Conduct and reminds members that these do not change whether communicating via social media, face-to-face or traditional forms of media. So it's definitely worth reading through a copy of the guidance note and familiarising yourself with its contents. A follow-on question we may receive is, how do you ensure you operate in line with the RICS guidance on the use of social media? And to address this, firstly, candidates could advise they are always sure to use social media in a responsible and professional manner in the same way that they communicate via face-to-face or other written forms of communication. They can also advise that they are sure to use professional and respectful language when communicating and understand their responsibility in representing the RICS. Candidates and members of the RICS should never make a post on social media that is dishonest or would cause offence in any way, and members should realise that this could potentially undermine public confidence and trust in the profession. And staying with this subject, another question we may expect on this area would be, when would the RICS investigate a social media post made by one of its members? And to address this, candidates could advise that an investigation may take place if a social media post is discriminatory, dishonest, abusive or threatening, likely to cause significant harm, distress or offence to a person, shows a pattern of frequent or large number of concerning communications, and ignores previous advice or warnings about concerns. And with the recent introduction of the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark, this is another area that may be a hot topic for candidates sitting their final assessment in 2024. A question we may anticipate on this area is, could you please explain your understanding of the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS is launching a scheme known as the Inclusive Employee Quality Mark. This is designed to improve diversity and inclusion within the property and construction sector, which is always typically lags behind other industries. The scheme requires employers to pledge their commitment to adopting and continually improving against the following 6 principles. These are leadership and vision, recruitment, staff development, staff retention, staff engagement, and continuous improvement. Participating firms will be required to assess their performance against these criteria on a biannual basis. The RICS will use the assessment information to document the outcomes and trends for the profession as a whole. And participating firms are able to use the branding signatory to the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark. A follow-on question we may receive in this area is, what are the main benefits of diversity and inclusion? Candidates can advise that diverse inclusive environments help to attract skilled professionals from diverse backgrounds. They establish a sense of belonging among employees. It encourages employees to feel more connected, increases productivity, reduces staff turnover, and allows employees to feel valued and accepted. With there being a big push by the RICS to improve diversity and inclusion, another question we may receive regarding this area is, what is the RICS doing to improve diversity and inclusion? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS has set up Diversity Inclusion Leadership, which is a knowledge hub allowing the RICS to share ideas on how and why diversity and inclusion is so important to the RICS. This has included initiatives including International Women's Day, celebrating the achievement of women in our profession, Pride 2022, with an equality pledge focusing on the importance of the LGBTQ+ representation in the profession, a Smith Review aiming to develop black and ethnic minority talent within the profession. And following the updated definitions of professional standards and practice information, this question again is another area that may be a hot topic for APC candidates. And that is, please explain your understanding of how the RICS define professional standards versus practice information. And to address this, candidates can advise that following the Birchwood Review and its recommendations, the RICS have introduced 2 new definitions for professional guidance, which are now split into professional standards and practice information. These supersede the former definitions, including professional statements, guidance notes, and codes of practice. Professional standards set out requirements or expectations for RICS members and regulated firms, with a focus on the baseline expectations for competence and ethical behaviour. They contain mandatory requirements that surveyors must follow where the word must is used, with best practice that surveyors should follow where the word should is used. And practice information sets out supporting guidance that advise surveyors in delivering specific services or working in specific areas of practice. The guidance is not mandatory and does not provide explicit recommendations. Therefore, practice information can refer to processes, toolkits, checklists, insights, research, and technical information or advice. Another question we may expect to see as a hot topic is, please explain your understanding of the guidelines around the use of the RICS logo. And to address this, candidates can advise that they are aware that the RICS guidelines are split into the rules of conduct for firms, use of the RICS logo and designation, and guidelines for personal use of the RICS logo. These guidelines contain detailed information regarding correct usage, which is approved by the Standards and Regulations Board. As a qualified RICS member, you have the right to use the logo for personal use, for example on business cards and personal email signatures. And there are specific rules around how the RICS master logo is presented. For example, the font and colour must not be adjusted, and there should be a minimum clearance around the logo equivalent to the size of the capital R within RICS. And here is a graphic to demonstrate the correct usage of the RICS logo.
What are the new RICS professional indemnity insurance requirements for 2022? To address this, we can say that the requirements for professional indemnity insurance were updated following issue of the UK Professional Indemnity Insurance Requirements version 9 with effect from the 1st of April 2022. The new requirements introduced a change to the maximum uninsured excess of professional indemnity insurance. This essentially means that for large companies with a turnover in excess of £10 million, there is no maximum limit of uninsured excess, whereas for companies with a turnover of less than £10 million, the maximum uninsured excess is the greater of £10,000 or 2.5% of the insured sum. And here we can see the new requirements in a table format. The next question we'll take a look at is, what are the general requirements regarding professional indemnity insurance set by the RICS? And to address this, we can say that the policy cover must be made on each and every claims basis. This means that each claim is considered in its own right rather than in the aggregate. The RICS sets out the minimum levels of indemnity based on the company's turnover within the preceding year. The policy must be fully retroactive. This means that no matter when the claim took place, it's the policy that's actually in place at the time is the policy that will be called upon. The RICS sets out the maximum levels of uninsured excess as previously discussed. Run-off cover must be in place, and we must say that the policy should cover past and present employees, directors and partners. And from this table we can see the minimum levels of indemnity based on company turnover. For example, for companies with a turnover of £100,000 or less, the minimum level of indemnity cover required is £250,000. The next question we'll take a look at is, what is the RICS Futures Report? And to address this, we can say that in 2015, the Futures Report was launched and highlighted key trends in the industry such as urbanisation, disruption of big data and the climate crisis, as all presenting key challenges to the property and construction industries. Since 2015, the RICS have analysed these trends by engaging with the profession to keep its members best informed on how to address these key issues. Resulting findings highlighted within the 2020 Futures Report include, first of all, that construction is an industry that produces large amounts of data. It's the industry that produces the most amount of data behind the financial services sector. However, it's currently estimated that 95% of the data is currently wasted. The RICS is setting up an innovation and technology hub to act as a centre of expertise on how this data can be put to good use. Another key issue highlighted was the rapid urbanisation in China, where the formation of megacities is creating key challenges. The amount of land classed as urban has doubled since the year 2000, resulting in polluted, congested and expensive areas. The RICS aims to encourage its members working in these regions to adopt a more sustainable approach to the development of these areas, and this has been done through utilisation of outer urban areas. Another key issue highlighted was the rapid increase in the use of drones within the industry. This has presented key challenges in terms of compliance issues for surveyors, taking into account current and emerging regulatory trends, national and international legislation standards. The RICS is helping its members by developing a number of online courses to support surveyors in this area to ensure that the technology is being used efficiently, safely and legally. The next question we'll take a look at is, what is the RICS Levitt report? And to address this, we can say that the Levitt report was commissioned by the RICS following a Treasury Management audit in 2018. Prior to the audit, the RICS had to extend its overdraft facility by around £3 million due to inaccurate cash flow forecasting. The Treasury Management audit offered a no assurance verdict on RICS internal financial control procedures, and following this, the Levitt report was commissioned. The conclusion of the Levitt report alluded to an internal power struggle due to its two-board structure made up of a management board and executive board. Following the report, the RICS accepted each of Levitt's its recommendations, including that the RICS Government Council to have more oversight over internal dealings of the RICS. The RICS Governing Council are to be briefed by the Management Board as opposed to a single CEO. The RICS Governing Council are to oversee executive management bonuses, and the report called for greater transparency as the CEO could have involved the Management Board in order to rectify the Treasury issues. No evidence of improper or illegal conduct was discovered as a result of the Levitt report. The next question we'll take a look at is what are the new rules of conduct, which we can note were updated in February 2022. And to address this, we can first of all reference rule number 1, where members and firms must be honest, act with integrity, and comply with their professional obligations, including obligations to the RICS. Rule number 2, where members and firms must maintain their professional competence and ensure that services are provided by competent individuals who have the necessary expertise. Rule number 3, where members and firms must provide good quality and diligent service. Rule number 4, where members and firms must treat others with respect and encourage diversity and inclusion. And rule number 5, where members and firms must act in the public interest, take responsibility for their actions, and act to prevent harm and maintain public confidence in the profession. We may receive a follow-on question on this area due to the rules of conduct having recently changed, and to address this we can say that the previous rules have been in place since 2007. Following research and consultation with RICS members, firms and members of the public, the majority voted in favour of replacing the existing rules of conduct and separate global professional and ethical standards. This was to provide a single document to enable greater clarity for RICS members and firms, and there is now a greater focus on clearer example behaviours, understanding evolving technology, and tackling climate change. We may receive a follow-on question asking us to talk through our understanding of the changes to the rules of conduct, and to address this, we can say that the Rules of Conduct October 2021 Global Practice Statement overhauled the previous separate documents, which were the Rules of Conduct for members, Rules of Conduct for firms, and the Global Professional and Ethical Standards. Appendix A of the Rules of Conduct now contains the professional obligations of members and firms. We may receive a follow-on question to this asking us to talk us through our understanding of the changes, and we can say that following the issue of the Rules of Conduct October 2021 Global Practice Statement, this document now overhauls the previous separate documentation, which were the Rules of Conduct for members, the Rules of Conduct for firms, and the Global Professional and Ethical Standards. So these three separate documents have now been overhauled in the 2021 Global Practice Statement, and Appendix A of this document now contains the professional obligations of members and firms. Candidates may also receive follow-on questions asking to explain an in-depth understanding of each of the rules of conduct. So the first question we'll take a look at on this area is please explain your understanding of rule number 1. And to address this, candidates could say that having reviewed the example behaviours, in adhering to rule number 1, members and firms should not allow themselves to be influenced improperly through the acceptance of work referrals, gifts or hospitality. Members and firms must also be sure to identify conflicts of interest and not provide services or advice where these conflicts of interest occur. This could be a scenario, for example, where you have reduced impartiality due to an existing relationship, for example being friends with a main contractor who has subsequently been selected to submit a tender would form a conflict of interest that would need to be reported. If asked to explain your understanding of rule number 2, candidates could reference that ensuring compliance with rule number 2, members and firms must only act for clients where they have the necessary knowledge, skills and resources to carry out the work competently. Firms must supervise any employees or subcontractors undertaking work on their behalf. For example, requesting that a junior surveyor undertakes a complex valuation due to resourcing issues would create problems in achieving compliance with this rule. Instead, an experienced and suitably qualified surveyor should be asked to undertake the valuation. In explaining our in-depth understanding of rule number 3, candidates could reference that as an RICS member or regulated firm, we must be sure to understand a client's project-specific requirements before acting on their behalf. The client's scope of services should be agreed, along with any exclusions and timescales for achieving each of the deliverables before signing up to formal terms of engagement. In explaining our understanding of rule number 4, candidates can advise that the RICS expects its members to respect the rights of others and treat others with courtesy. We need to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and look to eliminate any instances of discrimination on the basis of disability, gender, pregnancy, race, religion, or sexual orientation. RICS members and firms also need to adopt a no-tolerance policy to bullying or harassment. In explaining our understanding of rule number 5, Candidates can advise that members and firms are required to question practices and decisions that they suspect are not right and raise concerns with colleagues, senior management, clients or the RICS. When making public statements, we need to ensure that these do not undermine public confidence in the profession. When receiving and processing complaints, we need to ensure that these are dealt with promptly, openly and professionally. In complying with rule number 5, a useful sense check to ensure compliance is to ask ourselves if we would be comfortable in standing behind our actions if these were brought into the media or a public forum. We may also receive a question checking our understanding of the professional obligations of members. And to address this, firstly, we need to reference that members must comply with the CPD requirements set by the RICS, which requires 20 hours of CPD for each calendar year, 10 hours of which must be formal CPD. Secondly, that members must cooperate with the RICS. And thirdly, that members must promptly provide all information reasonably requested by the Standards and Regulation Board or those exercising delegated authority on its behalf. Candidates may also receive a question checking their understanding of the professional obligations of firms. And to address this, first of all, they must reference that firms must publish a complaints handling procedure, which includes an alternative dispute resolution provider approved by the RICS, and they must also maintain a complaints log. Number 2, that firms must ensure that all previous and current professional work is covered by adequate and appropriate professional indemnity cover. Number 3, that firms with a sole principal must make appropriate arrangements for their professional work to continue in the event of their incapacity, death or absence or inability to work. Obligation number 4 is that firms must cooperate with the RICS. Obligation number 5, where firms must promptly provide all information reasonably requested by the Standards and Regulation Board. Rule number 6, that firms must display on their business literature, in accordance with RICS public policy on designations, and a designation to denote that they are regulated by the RICS. And finally, obligation number 7, where firms must report to the RICS any matter that they are required to report under the rules for the registration of firms.
The next question we'll take a look at is, please explain your understanding of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete and why this may be of concern. And to address this, candidates can advise that RAAC is reinforced lightweight concrete which is used to form panels or planks. It has no aggregate unlike regular concrete and was mainly used in flat roofs, floor panels and wall panels. It was commonly used in the UK from the mid-1950s to the mid-1990s in schools, hospitals and public buildings. There have been recent concerns about RAAC due to the risk of structural failure, in particular due to the following factors: damage due to water ingress, corrosion of reinforcement, excessive thermal degradation, and poor original installation. A follow-on question we may receive is, how would you identify whether a building has reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete? And to address this, we can first of all advise that to identify RAAC, a suitably qualified professional should be appointed, such as an RICS chartered building surveyor or structural engineer. Key indicators include light grey or white panels in appearance, the underside of the panels appears smooth, and the inside of planks appear bubbly unlike traditional concrete. There will be no visible stones or aggregate within the panels, and here are a couple of images that indicate RAAC, such as the underside of the panels appearing very smooth in texture and the inside of the panels appearing bubble-like in texture. A follow-on question we may receive in this area is, what steps would you recommend to a client in order to identify whether a building contains reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete? And to address this, we can first of all advise that RAAC planks were mainly used from the 1950s until the 1990s, so the advice here would typically apply to buildings dated from around this time. If buildings are outside of this period, then it's unlikely that they contain RAAC. I would then inquire whether the building owner or local authority holds any similar buildings within their portfolio that are known to possess RAAC within their structure. I'd also review any records available about the construction of the building to identify if RAAC is mentioned. Key brand names referenced indicating that RAAC may have been used include Durox, Ciparex, Hebel and Celcon. If I could not identify the construction type of a roof and suspect it may be formed from RAAC, I would advise that the roof must be inspected by a qualified RICS chartered building surveyor or structural engineer. Following inspection and identification, I would then advise that the client puts provisions in place to manage the risks within their building, for example, use of temporary propping, isolation of areas within the building that are at risk, and the remedial works would be advised in order of priority depending on areas most at risk. We may also receive a following question asking whether reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete poses a health risk, and to address this we can advise that the main concern around properties having RAAC are only due to its lack of durability and structural integrity or risk of structural failure. There is no other evidence to suggest it poses other health risks, despite it sometimes being linked to asbestos, which is a common misconception. And the last question we'll take a look at on this area is, what is the RICS doing to help tackle the issue of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete within buildings? And to address this, we can advise that first of all, the Department for Education produced a list of 231 schools affected, and with this number set to rise, the RICS is looking to offer support for the education sector with specialist structural engineers and the Construction Industry Council to help building operators mitigate the risks of RAAC. The RICS is advising the Department for Education on surveying properties within their estate and offering guidance on the remedial action that can be taken to make the buildings and those occupying them safe.
The next competency we'll take a look at is building pathology. And the first question we'll take a look at under this competency is, what are the typical defects of a flat roof and what are the remedies? And to address this question, first of all, we can mention a typical defect with a flat roof is crazing. And surface grazing is caused where there is a lack of adequate protection from the harmful effects of exposure to the sun, or in rare conditions a chemical attack. If this is only in a small localized patch, then no treatment is necessary but should be regularly rechecked. However, if it's more widespread, the areas will have to be re-roofed and specialist protection introduced. Another common defect we could reference is blistering, and blisters can be caused by water vapour pressure occurring below the roof covering, and the blister should be cut and then rebonded to the underlay, allowing any trapped moisture to escape first. The source of the moisture should also be traced and rectified. And these are typical examples of crazing and blistering that we can see in the shown photos. Another question we may be asked is, what other sorts of cracks would you expect to see on a brick building and what may have caused them? And to address this, first of all we could reference subsidence, and this is a movement down in the ground level, and this can occur in clay soil where the growth of large trees which remove water from the ground can cause this. And this can lead to vertical cracking if in the centre of a building, or diagonal cracking if at the corner of a property, and the cracks will be larger at the top and thinner at the bottom. We could also reference a ground heave, and this is a upward movement in the ground level, and in clay soil the removal of a tree will often increase the moisture content of the soil, and this could cause the soil to swell or the ground to swell. And this leads to vertical cracking, again if at the centre of the building, or diagonal cracking if at the corner of the property. We could also reference a settlement, which is a downward movement due to an increased load of a building. Typically buildings will settle when first constructed, or if there is a change in the load as a new load settles and increases the bearing capacity on the soil. And these are some diagrams showing the different types of causation of cracks within buildings, including the heave, subsidence and settlement. Another question we may be asked under the building pathology competency is checking our understanding of the term damp or dampness in buildings. And to address this, we can say that a building is only considered to be damp if the moisture becomes visible through the discoloration and staining of finishes, or causes growth of mould, sulfate attack, frost damage, or even drips and puddles are prevalent in the property. A follow-on question we may be asked in relation to damp is, how could you test for dampness within properties? And to address this, we could say that we would use a protometer, moisture reader, or speedy carbide meter, and this can be used to establish the moisture content of walls and the level of damp that's prevalent within the property. We may also be asked a question on how to identify rising damp, what are the causes, and how would we look to remedy rising damp. And to address this, we could say that rising damp causes high tide marks, peeling, and blistering of wall finishes, musty smell. It can also cause rotting timber, and a use of a speedy carbide meter can be used to measure moisture readings within the walls of a property, and the readings with the moisture meter will result in high surface readings, often with slight decline, finishing with a sudden cut-off. The causes of rising damp can include where there is no damp-proof course in place, or there may be damp-proof course bridging caused by pointing, render, soil, or paving, or mortar droppings. And the remedy for rising damp can include remedy to any damp-proof course issues. This can include removal of any sources of bridging, and also a chemically injected DPC. We may also be asked a question on what type of soil is susceptible to ground heave and what are the potential or possible causes. And to address this, we can say that cohesive soils such as clay are often susceptible to ground heave. Possible causes could include the removal of trees, a change in the water table, leaking drains, or inadequate foundations that are built within the movement zones. And the last question we'll take a look at under building pathology is what are the common defects associated with flat roofs. And to address this, we can say that common defects include blistering or splitting of coverings, sagging due to failure of decking between joists, ponding due to insufficient falls, and damages to flashings and inadequate solar protection. We'll now take a look at some questions that are focused on the inspection competency. The first question we'll take a look at under the inspection competency is what do you need to consider before going to site to carry out an inspection? And first of all, we can reference the consideration whether we are competent to undertake the inspection. We also need to ask ourselves, are we properly insured? Whether a formal agreement has been signed by the client and is in place prior to undertaking the inspection. What are the particular risks that we need to consider in regards to health and safety, working at height, any presence of asbestos, for example. We'd also need to consider what kind of survey it is that we are undertaking, and also review all relevant information that relates to the existing building information, any leases and transaction prices. And finally, which type of equipment we would need to take along in order to carry out the survey. We may also be asked a follow-up question to this, checking our approach and understanding of how we would go about undertaking an inspection of a property. And to address this, we could say that my own personal preference when undertaking inspections has been to undertake these from the top floor of the property, working my way down. In the past, I've normally walked around the building externally a couple of times, first of all to get my bearings and get an initial understanding, paying close attention to the indication of age, the form of construction, and any extensions and external defects. I've then started the inspection externally by inspecting each elevation in turn, looking at the roof, elevations, windows, doors, drainage, and any rainwater goods. I would then typically move inside and again start from the roof space and move down through the various floors of the property. We may also receive a question from the assessors asking what kind of risks we would need to consider, and to address this we could first of all reference the risk of lone working, the presence of any asbestos, our ability to access roof spaces at height, our ability to access roofs and roof spaces, and in particular the risks associated with working at height. We'd also need to consider any hazards associated with the derelict nature of the property or the empty property, and also any risks associated with working within confined spaces. We may also get a question from the assessors checking our understanding of the equipment associated with undertaking property inspections. And in this example, we may get asked a question on our understanding of how a disto laser measure works and how we would go about checking whether this is accurate. And to address this, we could first of all say that the disto sends out a laser beam and measures the time taken for it to reflect, which then generates a distance. We could check this by first of all using a known measured distance within the office prior to undertaking the inspection. And we'd also need to say that it would become less accurate the longer the distance, and also reference that it's particularly difficult to use this piece of equipment outside over long distances because it is difficult to aim and see the laser. The next question we'll take a look at is, have you heard of a theodolite and how does this work? And to address this, we could say that the theodolite is an optical instrument consisting of a small mounted telescope which is rotatable in both horizontal and vertical planes, and this is used to measure angles in both horizontal and vertical instances. The telescope is mounted on a tripod with adjustable legs, and the theodolite is then used in the field to obtain precise angular measurements for triangulation, and levelling can also be accomplished with the aid of a spirit level using crosshairs in the telescope, and this would permit accurate alignment with the objective being sighted. We may also get a question on our understanding of a hygrometer, and to address this we could say that a hygrometer is used to measure the amount of humidity in the air and to diagnose condensation. An electrical resistance meter provides the temperature and relative humidity. Older equipment also includes the whirling hygrometer. We may also be asked a question on our understanding of an anemometer, and to address this we can say that this is used to measure the air movement within buildings to establish ventilation requirements where condensation has been known to be an issue, and this measures the air movement around ducts, grills, windows and doors, where we could use this piece of equipment to check these areas. And wind speeds to external faces of buildings can also be checked to establish high levels of exposure to driving rain due to the location of a property. The next question we'll take a look at is, what are the key building elements you would typically look to inspect and look to survey? And to address this we could say that we would normally pay close attention to roofs, walls and cladding, any rainwater goods, windows, doors and joinery, the structural frame of the building, the substructure and basements, the ground floors and raised floors, any finishes, internal walls and partitions, the staircases of the property, any sanitary fittings, building services, and finally any outbuildings. We may also be asked a question from the assessors on what are some of the key valuable sources of occupiers information you would normally look to obtain prior to the survey of a property, and to address this we would reference any structural alteration drawings, any guarantees in respect of the premises or its services, any flooding or boundary documentation, documentation on items of fixed equipment likely to be removed by the occupiers, records of service agreements on items of plant, any records of testing of life safety systems, water hygiene and Legionella reports, planning and building control applications and approvals, any documentation on the operation and maintenance manuals, asbestos registers, any documentation on radon tests and high alumina cement tests. We may also be asked a more specific question on what precautions we would take if we were to inspect a flat roof by using a stepped ladder whilst lone working. We would first of all prepare risk and method statements before undertaking the survey. We would also consider the height of the roof, and if it was more than a single story in height, I would arrange alternative access. We could also say that we would consider the type of ladder being used and state that it must be capable of being placed against the wall at an angle of 70 degrees, allowing the surveyor to undertake the inspection of the roof without standing on the last 4 rungs of the ladder. We could also reference that we would consider if the roof was fragile or suitable to be walked on, and even if it was suitable to be walked on, I would not suggest that this was appropriate from a ladder unless there was a fixed ladder in place. Another follow-on question relating to this area is, if you were asked to inspect a flat roof, talk us through the inspection process you would undertake. And to address this, we could firstly say that we would gather historical information about the building and details of any current or previous issues with the roof, making arrangements for access and preparing any necessary risk and method statements. We would first of all identify the age of the roof, establish any previous repairs having been undertaken, and establish when the roof is known to be defective. For example, when does it leak, is any ponding water present on the roof, the use of the room from the occupied space below, the use of any balconies or terraces. We'd also consider the access arrangements and secondly, carry out a physical inspection during or after any period of rainfall. We may also be asked a question on our awareness of any RICS documentation that provides guidance on undertaking safe inspections, and to address this we could reference the Property Inspection Technical Guidance for completing of single surveys. We could also reference more recently the COVID-19 Guide to Surveying Services, and finally we could also reference the RICS Guide to Surveying Safely. We'll now take a look at some questions focusing on the construction technology competency. Under this competency we may be asked a question on our knowledge of the different types of pile foundation methods, and to address this we can first of all reference sheet piles, secant piles, board piles and precast piles. We may then be asked a follow-on question on our knowledge of how board piles work, and to address this we could say that an auger is used to excavate the soil, concrete is then poured in along with any reinforcement that's required. Another question we may be asked is what advice would you give a client who was wanting to know the technical disadvantages of a steel frame construction? And to address this we could say that we would make the client aware that the steel frame requires fire protection, parts or individual parts may need replacing over time. The price of steel is incredibly volatile and may create risks within the development. It also requires experienced, skilled builders, resulting in additional cost, and these kind of resources may be hard to acquire. We may also be asked a question on our understanding of the term buildability, and to address this we can say that buildability refers to the practicality and ease of construction associated with the design, and the main contractor's expertise around buildability should help to realise improvements to both ease of construction and realise the efficiencies that are available from the design. The next question we'll take a look at is what are the benefits of off-site construction compared to in situ? And to address this we can say that safety hazards such as falls from height are more likely to occur on site than in a factory environment. Quality of construction should be improved from the manufacturing process within a controlled environment. Sustainability can be improved through reduced waste and power generated from renewable sources. Speed of delivery can be increased as work off-site can be undertaken in parallel to works on-site. The next competency we'll take a look at is legal and regulatory compliance. And the first question we'll take a look at under this competency is a very high-level question, checking our understanding of the building regulations. And to address this we can say that the building regulations are made under powers provided in the Building Act in 1984 and apply in England and Wales, and they exist to ensure the health and safety of people in and around all types of buildings, for example whether that's domestic, commercial or industrial, and they also provide for energy conservation and cover the access to and the use of buildings. A follow-on question we may be asked in relation to this is what is deemed to constitute building work under the Act, and to address this we can say that building work is defined in Regulation 3 of the Building Regulations, and the definition means that the following types of project amount to building work, and this could be for the erection or extension of a building, the installation or extension of a service or fitting which is controlled under the regulations, an alteration project involving work which will temporarily or permanently affect the ongoing compliance of the building, service or fitting with the requirements relating to structure, fire or access to and the use of buildings, the insertion of insulation into a cavity wall, and the underpinning of foundations of a building. We may receive a follow-on question checking our understanding of when the building regulations apply, and to address this we can say that the building regulations apply to any building that involves the erection of a new building, the extension of a building, the material alteration of an existing building, the installation, alteration or extension of a controlled service or fitting. The next question we'll take a look at is checking our understanding of the approved documents under the Act, and to address this we can say that these provide practical guidance on methods to comply with the functional requirements of the building regulations, and this is contained in a series of 14 approved documents. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the difference between an approved inspector versus building control, and to address this we can say that approved inspectors are businesses which work in the private sector as an alternative to local authority building control, whereas an approved inspector will be registered with the Construction Industry Council to advise and guide clients about the building regulations. The next question we'll take a look at is what is a full plans application, And to address this, we can say that a full plans application can be used for any type of building work and gives the added protection of having the plans approved. The full plans application is deposited with the local authority, usually together with 25% of the full charge payable. With agreement, work may be started after 2 working days. However, before the plans are checked and approved, it is at the client's own risk, and you will be invoiced for the remaining part of the charge after work starts. You must inform the local authority at certain stages of the work so that they can carry out inspections to confirm that the building work is in accordance with the approved plans. And on satisfactory completion of the building work, you'll be given a completion certificate. The next question we'll take a look at is what is a building notice application? And to address this, we can say that a building notice cannot be used where the building is a workplace, as identified in the Regulatory Reform 2005. The notice is served on the local authority together with the full charge payable, and work may be started after 2 working days. The local authority may ask for further details to support the notice, and you must inform the local authority at certain stages of the work so they can inspect the works ongoing. As no plans have been approved, it is important that these notifications are given, and on satisfactory completion of the building work, you'll then be given a completion certificate. That brings us towards the end of this Q&A practice session. I really hope you found that video useful, and please remember to subscribe to receive ongoing APC support.